Yes, you did.
We've met at some point. We're home.
Yeah, I know you. No, I mean, that's what I always yelled at him.
He's been trying this for 2-3 years. He thinks he's going to be chairman of the big board.
Right. Right.
And no, I don't support any of this whatsoever. You guys do your stuff. We'll do our stuff. Me and Rick work together all the time. We've already negotiated the fees down. Everything is good.
Right. What you guys already do together is what they're saying the Super Bowl is going to do. Their problem is they're not a part of it.
They want, basically what I'm reading between the lines here, they want to reestablish the pension department at City Hall.
That's exactly what it is. The same people that we found. What's up, bud?
Hey, how you doing, man?
Good, man, you?
John, thank you.
Yeah, that's, all they're trying to do is the same thing that they had in place when
Get rid of City
when
Hall.
Teresa Stafford.
Exactly what it's called. Have their own auditor, their actuary, consultant, and the money manager.
So they can play with everything else. They can change what the benchmarks are. They can change the
Well, they can actually, they can
All right, good morning, everyone. I apologize for the late start, which is a little distressing because we've got a hard stop at noon as the Board of Zoning Adjustment must be in here at noon for that public hearing. I understand that what we're waiting on is okay, the slide deck is here. It's being loaded up. So I propose that we start with that, and that gives the administration a chance to kind of lay out the premise that underlies this proposed reorganization of the pension boards. We've got a pretty broad idea of an agenda. We'll hear the administration's proposal. Obviously, we want to hear from union leadership, members of the existing pension boards. I'm hoping to learn more about the case of the sort of purloined pension funds that's been referenced a lot, but we all need to be better educated on that. We'll have back and forth, and then if time allows, if there's members of the public who aren't stakeholders, we can hear briefly from them. But if you're a member of the union or a member of the pension board, we're going to hear from you. That's the whole point from being here. Are we ready to go with this thing? We ready? So Mr. Beard, I understand, is going to walk us through.
Robin's going to start first, and then I'll take over and we'll go from there.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming. So what I'm going to start with is just to explain the defined benefit plan so we all have a sense of what we're talking about and why this is important. But I want to, even before that, say this change will not affect anyone's pay, either now or when they retire. Okay? So let's will not affect your paycheck, it will not affect your retirement check. All we're talking about here is changing the structure of the board that is going to make investment decisions for the defined benefit plan. So let me first talk for a second about what the defined contribution plan is, which is what a lot of our employees are in. In a defined contribution plan, which is a 401A, like a 401K, you're going to put your contributions in, the city will match, and it will last as long as it lasts. If the market goes up and your investments do well, then you'll have more money when you retire. You could have less, but whatever is in there is what you've got. That's defined contribution. And that's what I think most employers are using some form of today. Okay, next slide. What we're talking about is the defined benefit pension plan that the city offers, and this means in defined benefit, when you retire, you get this benefit for life, a fixed amount that will be based on how long you've worked here, your salary, and a multiplier. So that means you're going to get some percentage of your salary. And for public safety, people hired before 2011, that multiplier is 3, which is very big. For folks like me, I'm in the general employees pension plan, it's 2.5, and that is very big. So what that means is that if you work here for 30 years, if you're in the public safety plans, police or fire, you can get about 80% of your salary for the rest of your life. And if you have included your spouse in the plan, he or she can get approximately 75% of your total amount for the rest of his or her life. So this is really like Social Security on steroids. These types of plans are not being offered by employers much anymore because they are very, very expensive for the employer. What we did in 2011 is we looked at how to affect the money that was coming into the defined benefit buckets to make sure that we were fully funded so that when you all retire, your benefit is fully there. You can look at other places around the country who have not taken those steps, and they are underfunded, which means that if everyone retired at the same time, there would not be enough money to pay them each the 100% value of what their pension should be. In Atlanta, that is not the case. In Atlanta, because of the 2011 change, when people retire, all that money will be there. Next slide, please. So again, in the defined benefit plan, the retirement benefit is unlimited, period. And what we're doing today has nothing to do with what, it is not what happened in 2011. Okay, what we're doing today is we're saying that money that the city's putting in, that you're putting in, is going into a bucket where investments are made. And investments are made to make sure that as much money as possible in that pension fund when people retire. Whatever's not in there is going to have to be made up by the general fund so that your pension is complete. And so what we're talking about today is how do we maximize the amount that is being invested in that pension fund to reduce the burden on the general fund. That's it. It doesn't affect your pocketbooks or your wallets now or later. Okay. Where's Katrina? Do you want to talk about this? I mean, this is basically talking about in the Reid administration.
So I just wanted to go through and kind of start with setting up where the mayor talked about and what I talked about earlier. People said, well, why are you doing this now? Why is because you should look at things like this and do them when you're not in a situation extremis, when you're at a stable place, a stable platform, and you can take the time to be reflective. When this administration first started, reserves sat at roughly $7 million. We're up to $175 million. Credit ratings have moved up, all because of the actions we've taken early, the hard moves. So now is the right time to stop, be reflective, and make changes. I tell people you never want to start thinking about things when you're under stress and have to make decisions without thinking through them. So what was the genesis of this? Back when the Blue Ribbon Commission was talking about things that we could do, one of the things that came out in the final report in 2014 was to maximize the returns of the pension fund by looking at improving the returns and reducing the administrative costs. So that's what the end game here is to look at how do we maximize our returns on investments as well as reduce the administrative cost. So what we were proposing is, like we said earlier, is to make investment decisions be the best that they can. Bring the 3 pension boards together into one investment board to try to look at economies of scale to achieve lower costs, to implement best practices, and still maintain separate. I want to stress this because I've heard it talked about there's some thought around trying to commingle funds. That's not the desire. Separate funds for accounting purposes and for actual purposes, as well as creating administrative subcommittees to work on things like claims administration and non-investment related things. What we're trying to get to, as I said earlier, is about reducing administrative costs, optimizing performance. And when I talk about performance, there's some elements of performance that I'll talk about later that aren't as straightforward as investment returns, things like volatility, Sharpe's ratios, and things like that I won't bore the audience with, but it's part of the analysis to say that this is the way we should move forward. I want to stress again what we're not talking about. I've heard people say this out loud, oh, this is going to change my retirement. It's going to change my paycheck. Neither is the case here. Once again, not commingling, they're maintained separately, and we're not eliminating representation on the boards. Both active and retired participants remain active on all of the investment board. We're trying to professionalize or increase the level of financial expertise in the room when hard investment decisions are made, and like I said, save on investment cost. And we also, one of the portions of this that hasn't been talked about yet is increasing transparency through additional reporting requirements out to the general body. So we talk a lot about investment returns, and I want to show a graph that kind of lays out the investment returns since 2010. You'll see the range, low range, some negatives in 2016, the highs in 2011. And that chart is, the numbers are pretty good. But what you also notice in that chart is something that we don't talk about a lot, volatility. It goes up and down and up and down, and that's what we're trying to bring some professional people in to help us manage volatility, to smooth this out, to get a rate of return that's kind of smooth and level without these whips and saws. And also to look at ways to bring on board the top talent. There are studies that say that the difference between the average manager and the top decile manager can be 50 to 100 basis points. So those are the kind of things we're trying to bring to bear. And to reduce the volatility, get top tier managers on board. Now I want to make sure I say this for the record. These returns are not that far out of line with the general market returns of the day. And they are kind of in line with what will be considered generally accepted returns for that period of time. What they don't represent is what we would call the risk or the volatility, and we can get into more detail about that if that's where this body wants to go. I've also heard talk around the contributions that the city makes. I just wanted to lay out, just so everybody gets an idea of what we're talking about, the city's contribution to pensions. We're all in this together. So employees contribute, the city contributes, all together. This lays out the city's contribution. The city's contribution generally is 25%. The employee's contribution is based 25 to 30% of the overall contribution, but this is just the city's portion. And you'll see we're talking about $100 million, $120 million at the high end, $82 million at the low end, averages roughly $100 million. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands the city has skin in the game as well as the employees. And the way the graph is laid out, you'll see general in gray at the bottom, fire in the middle, and police at the top. I thought it was just an effective and efficient way to show that everybody has skin in this game. Wanted to lay out the current structure for the three boards for everybody to see, to make sure we're talking from the same place. As of the end of last quarter, what you're looking at is a general fund, a general employee, I keep saying general fund, general employee pension of roughly, total plan assets of roughly 1.3 billion, police 1.04, fire of $660 million. This is where it gets interesting after that. If you look at investment consultants, you see three different investment consultants. Third-party administrators, two. Now, I will, just to be clear, I understand that one has bought the other, so now they're considered a consolidated entity, but just note that is the case, that there are two different entities for people that we have to work with and interact with. Actuaries, two, with varying methodologies for handling questions that are put before them. Outside counsel, you'll see three different firms, and then various amounts of city costs between HR, finance, law, and other indirect costs that go into managing this structure. I wanted to talk about the total investment expenses. If you'll see at the bottom of the graph, this is the investment expenses and administrative expenses by across each plan for the years 2010 through 2017. And so we're talking about significant dollars when you add that up over time. I wanted to talk about some of the things that people have been talking about in the news, particularly Dallas has done this the most recently. Dallas went to a board makeup of 11 trustees, and Dallas did this under a point of extremis. If you remember, there were talks about bankruptcy, those sorts of things. That's why I said we need to do this now when we're not in this point of extremis. But back to their board makeup. 11 trustees, 6 appointed by the mayor, 1 police officer, 1 police active or retired elected by the members, firefighter active or retired elected by members, and 3 appointed by a nominations committee. So it has that mix of outsiders and plan representatives, with 6 appointed by their mayor. And they all have a requirement for some level of expertise. They demonstrated expertise in financial, accounting, business, investment, real estate, budgeting. So just upscaling the level of expertise to bring better decisions to bear. And then there's a consolidated governance between the police and the fire systems. So what were the changes that are on the table today? We wanted to talk about, in the future, combining the assets from an investment standpoint to the $3.4 billion, which gives us leverage in the market and makes us more desirable when we go out to seek out managers. Now the governance is controlled by 3 independent boards. We're looking at 1 board with subcommittees, 1 for each of the general employees, APD and AFR, an audit and governance, audit and compliance, as well as a governance and compliance, as well as an audit committee. So those would be the makeup. Board composition, if you'll notice, the major difference is there'll be council appointments. If you'll look at investment consultants, we'd like to see that reduced to 1 firm to providing investment consulting services across the board. A plan administrator, 1 firm to provide those services across the board, as well as an actuary to provide those services, and then a single outside counsel to advise the investment board and its related sub-boards. Also, there'd be a defined administrative overhead and indirect costs. So what are we trying to get to? And is it real money? The goal, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't say with 100% certainty, oh, this will be the outcome. But here's the goal. If we can it reduce our administrative cost, that's roughly by 20%, that's $1.4 million a year. If we can reduce our investment cost by 10%, that's $2.9 million a year. And let's say we can reduce or increase our plan performance by focusing on manager selection, the asset allocation model across all the plans. You're looking at $32 million. I think altogether we're talking about real money that would stay in the plan, that would grow to provide benefits to the plan participants now and in the future. So let's say I'm aggressive. I still would say that half of that number, $16 million, would still be real money and would make a difference in bending the cost curve for the plan. So the impact of the proposed changes, like I said, improve the returns, lower administrative costs. The impact to pension board trustees, the governance responsibility for generating returns and manage risks would have additional members with expertise in those fields on the ground with the boards to help make those decisions. We gain hopefully access to better external advice at lower cost, so the best and brightest managers would come to one centralized place, get allocations to work for this body and reduce at a reduced cost. And we want to better align the expertise and experience with trustees between investment and administrative. So the trustees that have experience in the different plans, they know the individuals, they know the administrative task of approving, reviewing those sorts of things that come before the body, retirements, disability retirements, survivor benefits and those sorts of things would still take place. And people who know their fellow officers would be there to help make those decisions. The impact for plan participants, they get better visibility in the board activities. We've planned and asked for greater reporting and greater transparency. We hope to have better confidence in plan performance based on increased expertise on the board level. And once again, I want to point out that there is no change in individuals' paychecks now and in the future, i.e. their retirement paycheck or otherwise. This is some legalese, so I'll let Law talk to this particular slide about the borders decision. You didn't want to talk about that? Okay. So they said that would conclude our...
Yes, it's up there now.
It's up there, so
Yeah,
you can talk about it at this point. Okay.
Could we go back? Thank you. So there's been some question about whether the city has the legal authority to make these changes. We do. But the thing that is, the case that makes this very clear is Borders versus City of Atlanta. It was decided unanimously by the Supreme Court of Georgia. And this, of course, looked at the changes that the city made in 2011 and very clearly sets out that the state has delegated, excuse me, has delegated authority to the city to create these plans, to change these plans. So we have full authority to do that. And, you know, I just want to say in 2011, the challenge was made to that. And, you know, if I'm not mistaken, pension dollars are being used to support these challenges. So if anyone has legal questions about our authority, I do refer them to the Borders case, which, again, the Georgia Supreme Court sets out very, very clearly, step by step, how the city has been authorized to make this type of change.
That sort of concludes the formal part of our presentation. We stand ready to take questions, hear from this body and anybody this body wishes to recognize.
All right, thank you. I believe I had neglected at the outset to recognize that in attendance today we have Andre Dickens, Mary Norwood, Yolanda Adrian, Madeline Archibong, and Alex Wan. My name is Howard Shook. So I think that kind of adequately lays out the administration's premise. I think it would be appropriate next, in order to be transparent, that what is before us now is going to, a substitute has been prepared. It's not in front of us yet, but I know Ms. Adrian had asked for one to be drafted, and I think copies have been or are available that's got some changes in it. And so I think it's appropriate before we get into the nuts and bolts, as some of those nuts and bolts may change, or at least they will be proposed to change in Ms. Adrian's substitute. So, Ms. Adrian, would you mind walking us through what you're going to ask the committee to look at in terms of modifications?
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for being here. A couple things jumped out at me right away, and I'll start with the appointment process. I'm sure it's not lost on any of you that under the first draft of the legislation that most of the appointments were made by the mayor. And so what I have proposed in the substitute is to change that so that we don't have a body that is heavily appointed by whoever our next mayor or subsequent mayors are. So the first change that I am proposing is that the chair, which is one of the most important positions, can be recommended by the mayor but must be confirmed by City Council. The vice chair will be, under this legislation, the same, whoever our mayor is or that mayor's designee. I had the occasion to look at the attendance of city council members over the years and felt that 5 city council members was not a good idea. First of all, most council members don't have the wherewithal to do this work, but most importantly, they don't show up. And so what I've proposed is that the council people be limited to 2. One would be the chair of finance, which that person would be highly motivated to attend the meetings and find that as part of their duty as being chair of finance. And the second person would be the chair of CDHS, since it affects compensation issues for all of you. I said finance first. There are 2 council members. One would be the chair of finance and the other would be chair of CDHS. So there would not be 5 council members. The next 2 members are people that are also confirmed by City Council, and that's the CFO and the head of HR. As you know, both of those people are appointed by the mayor, but they also require council approval. So those appointments have a layer of both mayor and council approval. The next person is a president's appointment, and that person is a person with actuarial experience. I've been told through word of mouth that it's hard to find someone with actuarial experience who's available, but that has been debunked by people who are in the field, people who serve across this country with experience. So that would be the next person, and that would be appointed by whoever our president is. The next 4 positions would be somebody from, as you would expect, the Board of Education, someone from fire, someone from general, and someone from police. And those, I believe, are appointed by your respective bodies. This group of 11 people, it's an odd number, so that you can address any issues of votes that are at a tie, are the chair of the overall investment committee. The rest of the committees would, the 3 under the other committees would have representatives of all the unions and trustees, as you would expect, and those are in the departments or the areas of actually distributing benefits, audit, I think it's called administration, the audit function, and so on. The other proposal is that, I lost my place, 1 minute please. The other place that I'm asking for an adjustment is under transparency. There's a new section E that talks about transparency. In my research, I noticed that the 3 funds are not at all consistent about what they put online for the benefit of the thousands of employees who participate in our pensions. Some of you put your things online and some of you don't. You are subject to the open records rules, but to me that's not good enough. I don't think people, employees, 7,000 people should have to make an open records request to learn what's going on. I've also learned that under the open records rules, you simply have to post a piece of paper somewhere in this building saying there's a meeting. And so I'm asking that the transparency before these boards mirrors what your elected bodies do, City Council. So the meetings have to be advertised. The minutes have to go online. There has, you know, the elected, your composition of your board members, all that has to be online under the transparency rules. And so there's a new section that describes those requirements. In addition, under audits, there are to be 2 audits. One is an experience audit, and that is an audit that asks for someone, for your actuary, to do a report that shows what their actuarial assumptions were those actuarial assumptions are age, number of years retirement, things like that, the demographics of our body, and the investment returns. And so those actuarial assumptions that actually mathematically determine what the contributions are to be looked at to measure against what the actual data shows to make sure that the actuarial assumptions hold up. And as you remember, a lot of you had as your actuarial assumption that the investment returns would be 8.5%, and that has not held up. And so most of you have lowered your assumption to either 7 or 7.5%. So those audits would be required 3 times every 3 years. In addition, there has to be an actuarial audit, and that actuarial audit requires that an independent actuary is hired to audit the work of your actuary. And that allows each of you participants, the thousands of participants, to see that the actuary's job is being done as you would expect. So that is also in the literature and recommended. So that has been described in the substitute. Lastly, there is, in the spirit of trying to have the best board you all can have, there are requirements for expertise. And we've added language that says that if you attend a program, it needs to be a recognized program. The paper, as it's presently written, says that you need to have experience with ethics, open records, conflicts of interest, things like that. But I think one of the most important things is a demonstration of knowledge about pension funds and how this works. And this, again, is to serve our 7,000 employees as best as we can, because this money is very precious to each of you, and it would be a terrible thing if the money wasn't managed to the highest standards possible. So those are the things that are in the required, or in the substitute, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have on that. Thank you.
Okay, so again, that what she just laid out is not formally before us, but in order to be transparent, you need to know in advance that this is coming rather than just learn about it at the next Finance Committee meeting, where Ms. Adrian does intend to ask that it be substituted. So, and we're all anxious to hear from the stakeholders. Before we get there, though, are there questions from council members about the administration's underlying premise or about Ms. Adrian's proposed changes? Are we ready to go? Okay, we're ready. So it's, I'm just going to open this up to stakeholders, union leaders. Oh, all right, here's the sign-up sheet.
Chairman Shook, quick question
Yes,
for you.
sir.
I didn't know whether when we were signing up to have the conversation, we didn't know if this was going to be open or trying on the 2-minute limit that it does on some public talking. So you have several people signed up to donate time. If we're just going to open that up, then I think that the fact that it's not on a time frame, then I think the stakeholders would be able to just speak freely on what we have.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go down the list then, and if
they want to speak, then just do it that way. We're not.
Yeah, if they want to speak, that's fine. Obviously, we're really hoping to hear from the subject matter experts among y'all, elected union leaders, existing or former pension board members, you know, the people who are really sort of have the most to add to the discussion. But I'll go down the list. Jan Boyer.
That's going to move down to Arcangeli.
Okay.
I donate time to LRA.
Okay, well, we're not, yeah, and we're not under that kind of constraint, so, Mr. Arcangeli.
Okay, so he's...
All right. Well, thank you, Detective Boyer. My name is Lou Arcangeli. I'm a retired City of Atlanta employee. More importantly, I'm a resident of Inman Park, and I've lived there for 36 years, and I vote. I was elected to the Police Pension Board as an active employee, and again for a 4-year term as a retired employee. I just want to preface this with this is the wrong ordinance, it's at the wrong reasons, it's the wrong timing, creates the wrong incentives, and it's wrong because it implies that, the finance department has implied that the employees are here because they're worried about their money. Well, as a pension fund trustee, I know the city is behind their pension obligation. They're not going to have a change in their pay or in their pension deduction immediately as a result of this ordinance. However, when you look forward, the pension boards do make changes in policy, and they do make changes in recommendations to council. And as we look at this, we say, this isn't something we need now. Our pension boards have evolved over 26 years, since 1991. And Councilmember Shook asked me to point out some of the history behind this evolution. And that is Mayor Maynard Jackson's campaign finance manager, Ray McClendon, created an investment scheme with Teresa Stampard, who was a City of Employees financial and worked in the City of Atlanta Finance Department. They were stealing money from all three pension funds. The police fund in 1991 the police pension board at the time voted to separate our investments from the collective city investments because they realized there was fraud going on. They weren't realizing the return. It wasn't transparent, as you pointed out, but mostly they knew something was amiss. The City of Atlanta employees banded together, created something called the Atlanta Pension Fund Membership Association. Had over 1,500 members at one time. I was president of that for several years. They spoke on behalf of all of the employees, and it all started because of that fraud. And the fraud was insidious in that the audits didn't detect it. The things that you proposed about the overarching audit and the overarching actuarial review, well, those things didn't detect it. Ultimately, it took a 7-year SEC investigation into these practices. It took Doug Blackman of the AJC peeling the onion for years, looking at records, looking at the mayor's telephone calls, looking at Teresa Stampard's access throughout the city. This body, the City of Atlanta City Council, impeded a lot of that productive evolution. At one point, the police and fire boards voted to have outside administrators. We felt that the costs from the finance department were exorbitant. We could do better. And if you could go back on one of your slides to look at the review, we hired the people who are now Zenith to do our administration. It was much cheaper. But this council passed a retroactive ordinance doing away with our ability to manage that. We had to sue our own city to get them to do the right thing, and the courts ruled that the board's policies do matter and that they are independent from council. And then, of all things, 2 years later, the City of Atlanta says, the outside administrator is a good idea. We're going to do it for all three, for the General Employees Board as well. And so the pension funds have evolved in a way in response to the fraud, in response to mismanagement, in response to the fact that City of Employees just don't trust the city. And that's why you have this outpouring here, is the lack of trust. In making the presentation, the finance department pointed out, and I want to say some very important words that they used. They used the words if, possibly, and could. They didn't say that this consolidation would. They didn't say that they'd studied it and the results were. Apparently they haven't been attending the pension board meetings where those issues are rigorously reviewed. The fact that we have diversity, the fact that we have 3 competing boards, the fact that those numbers were so close, all is attributed to the fact that it's a system that is working. I have gone online and found all the information that Councilmember Adrian mentioned, and I have no problem with the transparency. But I do think it's the wrong time. I think that it creates the wrong incentives. And I want to raise a kind of an ugly issue, and that's campaign contributions. We, as a police board, would ask consultants who came before us seeking our business if they had made significant campaign contributions to anyone in city government. And you should have seen the look on their faces. Some of them were just aghast that we would raise such a question, and others would say, no, we haven't participated at all. Now, we didn't count that or exclude any company because they'd made contributions. We just wanted them to be open about it. This city, in making the defined contribution plan, had a proposal that actually has cost us more money. The basis points used by the current defined contribution manager is significantly higher than under Nationwide. Now, we went backwards, and so it goes back to what the finance department said, which is if, could, possibly. This isn't a good practice that you're proposing. That's before you today. And we certainly don't want to go back to a time when there's so much authority or power invested in the mayor's office. And so your proposals speak to that, but it still consolidates and it still eliminates the diversity, the competition, the education. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find better educated or more competent pension fund trustees. Certainly, one of the men who followed me on the board, Rick Light, is far more knowledgeable about this consultants and the fees than these finance department employees, and I hope he gets the chance to ask them some questions. In closing, I just want to say that if you have any questions about the Ray McClendon, Teresa Stanford scandal, I can assure you that our mayor, Mayor Bill Campbell, who's now a convicted felon, at the time refused to pursue any restitution from these folks. The only people who went to federal court to testify on this city's behalf was me and Don Lee, who was president of the Police Pension Fund. And they tried to remove our standing. They said, well, these funds were not stolen directly from the police, therefore you can't speak. Well, I was a president of the general employee of the Atlanta Pension Fund Membership Association. I had standing. And then the judge asked me, well, do you live in the city? I went, yes, sir, I do. He said, he has standing. Because ultimately, as a taxpayer, I'll be making up the difference, not the employees. Eventually they could, as you increase their contributions or as these boards recommend that. But ultimately, the taxpayers want a competitive, diverse series of boards that represent all of our interests. Do we have any questions from anyone?
Thank you for your presentation and thank you for your service. The question I have for you, you said that the city is behind on funding the pension. What do you mean by that? Did you say that?
No. I think we're on track to meet our...
In the beginning, and your opening paragraph, you said that the city was behind on making its contributions. I mean, my colleagues heard you say that. Maybe you misspoke and you want to... Say that one more time.
He said the city was behind it.
The city of Atlanta supported it. Not that we have a deficit in our contributions. No, that's not the case at all. We're on track to we're over 80% funded in the police fund. We're well above the requirement, and it's a very healthy fund at this point. The losses that were incurred, the $20 million, that came from the federal court. Christopher Wray, the prosecutor, said the city of Atlanta lost over $20 million. This body, under Lee Morris, hired a law firm to try to recoup that money from Ray McClendon and Teresa Stanford. And there wasn't much there.
Oh, wow.
It all went to lawyers' fees, and so the city paid for an attempt to get that back. But our city, Mayor Campbell, delayed, denied, and protested every attempt for a best practice. He denied our ability to even seek the money back. We didn't even send our chief financial officer to court to ask for the money. I believe, of course, under Mayor Campbell, we didn't have the benefit that we've had under Mayor Reed. We have had a solid chief financial officer for his entire term. We've had Miss Yancey solidly representing HR at the pension meetings. That continuity, that professionalism was not present during the time when we had 7 chief financial officers in one mayor's term.
Right, right.
And so that speaks to the confidence of these folks. And while we're in a period of having good management, we're not necessarily confident that that's going to happen again. And these practices have evolved to prevent that.
Right. And I agree with you. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I didn't want this legislation to be heavily controlled by the mayor, because we just don't know no one knows in the next 10, 20 years what will happen. So I share your concern about that. And I'm glad the funds are nicely funded. I'm very glad about that. We are in good economic times. The stock market's extraordinarily strong. And I think our shared goal is, as we enter our next economic cycle, that we can minimize the impact on our returns, because there will be new cycles and new challenges. So I think we share those goals. Thank you.
Thank you. I know the law department wanted to respond.
Please do.
Good morning, Kristen Denius with the Law Department. I apologize in advance for my voice. After last week's Lunch and Learn session, where the discussion came up about this incident that happened in 1999, I'll admit I wasn't working here in 1999. In fact, I wasn't actually working in 1999. So I took it upon myself to do some research, and I have to tell you that what Mr. Arcangeli has narrated is, in fact, mostly what took place. So in 1999, Mr. McClendon, who had been a former city employee and a city employee at the time, I think her name was Miss Stanton. Anyway, they conspired. They conspired to defraud the city. At the time, the city's pension funds were invested as a pool with all of the city's investments. And the city as a whole was defrauded, and there was an effect on the pension plans. I would say that, and agreeing with Mr. Arcangeli, the city has evolved significantly from 1999 in how its pension plans are administered. And this, I think the intent of this proposal is a continued evolution. I don't think anybody disputes that oversight and independent review of these investments is critical to avoid something like that happening again. The problem in 1999, in a nutshell, was that you had the fox guarding the hen house and killing all the chickens. So when you have when you have a small group of people who, with the ultimate responsibility for both making the investments and reviewing and auditing them, yes, the opportunity for fraud is ripe. Since that time, of course, we have implemented as a city and as the pension boards multiple levels of review and oversight, and I think the intent here is to layer on top of that. The one thing that I do want to make sure that everybody understands is that what exactly happened in 1999, because I don't want anyone to think that that the pension funds themselves were harmed in a long-term fashion. So in 1999, what happened was Mr. Stanton's investment firm was given the responsibility for managing a large portion of the city's investments. And the conspiracy was that they churned investment trades. So they made a lot of unnecessary trades, and the firm received commissions that they should not have received off of all of those trades in an extreme excess amount. And because nobody knew that was happening, it continued for some time. Now, obviously somebody should have known that was happening, but in 1999, the controls were not in place. So the losses to the city were in lost opportunity costs because of the fees that were paid that should have not been paid. Now, from the pension plan standpoint, as Mr. Arcangeli noted, the funds themselves have been made whole by the city in an ongoing basis. Every year when the city contributes the actuarially determined amount that takes into account how much money is in the plan, how much money the plan has earned, and how much money the city needs to contribute in order to get to the place where it's supposed to be. So the pension funds have not been depleted in any kind of a way. At the end of the day, the city's general fund is what took the hit, and that's the taxpayers.
Excuse me, I believe as a taxpayer, I did take that hit because we lost $20 million.
I agree. No, correct. I think we're saying the same thing.
Right.
But it didn't count, the pension fund didn't take the hit directly.
You're right. In terms of our assumed, the amount of money that we have to pay over time, that's all the same. That hasn't changed. It's just taken us longer to make that up as a city. Our collective payments have increased because it took longer to make up, because we lost $20 million in 1999, which would be how much in 2017. So agreed, you correctly stated it was opportunity costs as well as the millions of dollars that went to Ray McClendon.
Ms. Adrian.
Well, and the other, and this is not on you all, it's on the city. The other thing about making up contributions is the unfunded liability was kicked around like a political football, and it was, the payments were amortized over various periods, whatever fit the budget. And that's been changed legislatively, as you are aware. We have a hard stop on amortizing that, which advances the cash that goes into the pension fund and advances the return on investments. So that occurred over a number of years. I don't know how many, but too many. So your statement being behind, I mean, if we were amortizing the unfunded liability over the 20 years that was intended right from the get-go, the money would have come in faster. But this council did fix that in 2010.
Ms. Norwood.
I'll wait and ask Mr. Beard once we're through with it.
All right, thank you. Next speaker is Paula Lyons. Okay. Thomas Gillard. Mr. Paul Cooper. Mr. Allen, you're up.
Thank you, Council Chair. Before I get into the meat of what I have to say, I'm going to take a little vindication right now. As Kirsten said that they've done research and they found out about what I was referencing in the lunch, and I was so boldly called by Ms. Shahar a liar, I would like a public apology, as she boldly called me that out in front of a public committee, that I was a liar about facts that have now been brought forward, now been vindicated by a person that testified in that federal case on it. And I believe fully that if anybody's going to be unprofessional enough to call me that when I'm referencing something that was a part of me as an employee here, and the course that was going on, I feel that that needs to be done. And in fact, it would be even nice to go ahead and put that in a written word to me so it can be posted on the IBPO website, for I've had so many people want to stand up to the fact of being called a liar for federal facts in the course of what's going on. So what I'll do now is go into the meat of what I want to talk about. And I'll wait on that apology, Ms. Shahar, at any time. I'll be pleased to pause. We had a committee, if you remember correctly, that was established in the original legislation. That committee was to be dealing with the defined contribution investments, and there was a certain board that was supposed to be set up for that. That was designated November of 2011 when we got started with this pension. It's actually November 1st of 2011. If you remember correctly, as we went on, I complained readily that that committee was never put into place. And in fact, a secondary ordinance had to be written by Felicia Moore and Yolanda Adrian as council members to direct the person that was in charge of putting that together to get it out, and that was Resolution 14R3607. And that was directing the Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Beard, to go ahead and put that committee together so that we would see and have transparency over those investments, what the costs were, what they are. In the Lunch and Learn meeting we had, Ms. Katrina Parks came forward and was readily talking about the lack of transparency because she stopped by the general pension meeting and it didn't have the ability to have the printouts, to have the things online. Several of her questions weren't answered directly, and she came and brought that to the meeting saying how this new legislation is going to help fix that. Well, many of the employees that are certainly recommended, that are revolving with me being over at the union now, talked about the fact that all these new employees are in this defined contribution plan. Where is it online? Where are the meetings? Where are the packets? Where are all of these things that this committee that was set up, in essence, and if you look at it, it is molded in a smaller group of what this legislation recommends, but yet we did nothing to do that. Where are the expertise training on the committee members? Any of you council members that are on that? Because the council members are supposed to be there. Do you have any ability to tell me how those funds are doing?
Let me interrupt you for a second, because you're comparing apples and kumquats. The defined contribution plan is self-directed. You make your own decisions. You look into Voya to see the returns and the results of those decisions. The body that you're speaking of, it's designed to look at the fund families that are involved and to make decisions along the fund families. Okay. All the perspectives are out there. I just hate that you're trying to jumble up a bunch of things. So your defined contribution, self-directed. Defined benefit, the board's direct. I would ask you not to conflate the two issues. The defined contribution plan is self-directed. I can go in myself, the funds and fund managers that I wish to invest in, look every day if I want into the Voya account to see exactly what those investment returns are. So you're doing the thing that you do where you want to push some items together. Now, the issue around the formation and the legislation, the resolution, I fully accepted a level of responsibility for not pushing that. There was no animus toward it. It was basically a time issue in getting various board members appointed. So, but that does not affect and did not affect your ability to go into that fund, make your own fund decisions, and then reap the benefits of those decisions and to see those in real time, daily, at any time you like, from any device you like, from anywhere you like. That concludes my comments to this gentleman.
And my response back, very simply, if you take a look on that legislation that I was referencing, which is the original legislation, it very much says the management committee shall manage and operate the DC plan. It shall make all final decisions that materially impact the management and operation of the DC plan. What I'm boldly saying is, where are these type of decisions that we have when they're looking at those money market, what are the returns? What are the basis points that we have to pay on that? All of the things that you're saying this super board group will do. This particular committee could have been a small model to show what that would be. Yes, it's in your vault where you are involved in your own and making the decisions of your own money. But this group has a management and a fiduciary responsibility because who else money's in there? Is the city not making a match? So that, in fact, is what I'm saying needs to be governed, and it should have been transparent as well, and that should have been a model, not something that took additional legislation to push.
Mr. Chair, I just want to be very clear that this work session is about the defined benefit plan, not the defined contribution plan.
Our participants have a bold position in both of those, especially all new hires. And it's nice that the law department, again, wants to go off. Thankfully, she's not calling me a liar again because I'm facting things that are directed in front of us. But that is my certain assumption and review of this, looking at why we were talking about a model that could have been something proposed to the city, by the city, and given to the employees to show that this super board and this management would have been something that has value to it and is working. There has been nothing done, and I mentioned this during the lunch and learn meeting, on an investment proposal and an investment group that I got in to learn how to do so. And that was simply that I was given an opportunity to model my money in a mock investment course, and they followed me for a year as I did those investments to see what was good, what was my strategy, what was positive, what was negative. As we've talked now, and this council has been very direct about trying to not haste a decision and make valued decisions for long-term success. The portion that I would say is why, if we feel that this is so good and is a possibility to show the difference and make such a long-term advancement and difference for us in the future, why wouldn't we run a year model? Why wouldn't we do a mock model to see if in fact this does return greater than what our pension board does? Because I attend those meetings, and Adrian, you are right, council members don't. And that's why it's nice when the legislation that you looked with, those people appointed to that don't attend. And I really appreciate the fact that you reduced that should somehow this actually get into place. But you don't have expertise issues with that. As far as that's concerned, we've got assumptions that this is going to make better. And these are one of the things the city always talks about, our actuary studies and the things that are in place, is that we're making assumptions, we change assumptions, and Adrian, you and I have talked about this readily in the different meetings. We have different things about that, and again, I'm sad that you're leaving the council, because they have been some great spirited conversations that have made me spend hours researching and learning more and become better myself to be able to converse on this. But it doesn't make any sense to me that we can't put a model together and watch this for a 12-month period of time, because if in fact they can prove the assumptions that they're coming forward, then we really have a good chance to sit down at the table, put that together, and be solid about it. And be able to say, you know what? It absolutely is the best practice and is going to do something for us long-term and be a long-term success for this city. To rush it in, to put it into play and hope that it works, to take, as Mr. Arcangeli so elegantly spoke about, the fact of the competition away, and we put it into a single investment strategy as opposed to at least two different strategies that we have, knowing that the volatility that we're talking about in the market, that different strategies have much greater success, and if we're relying on a single group of doing that, one of the things that helps the city's contributions that deals with it is, even if you have one of the pension boards that make a couple of bad decisions investment-wise, and another one made it, it changes, so the greater response reduces some of the city costs for the other one. I mean, those are the type of things that I think it needs to be done and looked at over at least a year's period of time, so that we can say, hey, you're right. This proposal went right. We have a place they just pointed out that Dallas, Texas did it. So why aren't we at least in communication with them and see how successful that one is as well while we follow our model? That's what makes sense to me, because if you can bring the facts forward that this works, then I think you take the fight out of what our concerns are with the historic fraud that has been in when you have a management group that is controlled by the city. And certainly this legislation that is forward without the substitute being in place was that. So with that being said on it, I am extremely pleased at what has happened with ours, and the board trustee that's the co-chair, Bud Light's going to take the mic now to be a little more direct. He is absolutely an expertise, has the certificates and things that we talked about wanting these other people to achieve. He has done that. He does training regularly. And this fund, our fund, based on the city's numbers that have occurred since they reported January 1 of 2010, we were around $614 million when we went into pension Armageddon. That fund now, as you just heard, is over $1 billion, almost $1.1 billion. That means we have over $500 million advancement between the contributions and the investment returns. That talks about some expertise on that board and what they do. I would love to see somebody else who have said that showed a model that they were going to have a return that was greater than what that board has done. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it, Councilman, as always, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak and use this time to support the officers and the heroes that are on the street daily with us. And again, as much as I am controversial and art out, I am as professional when I step up here. And to be called a liar by one of the people that are the main front of the law department in a public realm with city employees there, all hearing and listening to what they had to say, only because they didn't have the knowledge, and instead of saying, "What do you know?" If that doesn't deserve a public apology, I don't know what else does.
Let me propose this. We have to be out of here in 45 minutes, and I know we all are going to rest easy if we know we're going to get to hear from all of you. So let me real quick run down the list. And those of you who kind of signed up in order to donate your time, if you could just identify yourselves, then we'll all know we're going to have the time for the other presenters. Tony Williams? Okay, we know Richard Light. We're going to hear from him. Doug Strachan? Strachan, I'm sorry. Excuse me? Okay, thank you. Amber Roberts? Ed Emerson? Brent Hollander? Okay, Bill Boyd? Okay, thank you. John McNeil? Clint Myers? Paul Gertis?
I'll speak.
Thank you. Ms. Pagnotta?
I speak, but I have a suggestion since we got to be out in 45 minutes. Why don't we postpone it to another work session? Let's do another work session so everybody can have time to speak.
Let's get through this first. Kellen Evans? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Light. Sure, I'm sorry. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not a pension expert. What I am is a retired police officer. And what was echoed to me by the retirees was this. They've risked their lives, and they've done what they're supposed to do to get to the finish line. And what they're worried about is this legislation put them where they risked their life to get to that point. Is that this legislation that's being fast-tracked by the administration, after they've risked their life, this could put in risk their livelihood in retirement. That's something that they don't want. They want to make sure that when they get to the point that they're retired, that their livelihood is steadfast. I heard the administration, when we were talking about pension reform, the administration called himself the conductor of the train, if people remember that. What I would say with this, and I heard Ken Allen said, this being pushed so quickly and fast that we don't know what the outcome of the way this may play out. I would, with this being fast-tracked, I would say that this is more, if you remember the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, that with this going so quickly and it turns bad, who's going to be able to say that, hey, the police officers out there that's risked their lives are now left naked and unclothed because of something that's rushed to judgment? And at the end of administration, and this administration is coming to an end, what's the rush to get this done at the very end? This should be looked at, and we don't need to be where later on somebody has to say, yeah, you're naked now. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. Mr. Light.
Good morning. My name is Richard Light. I'm Vice Chair of the Atlanta Police Pension Fund. I've been a trustee for the last 10 years. If we can go to slide that we have up there on the administrative savings, if we can go to that slide, I appreciate it. While they're getting that slide, some of the training that and organizations I'm a part of, I'm a part of the Georgia Association of Public Trustees. I've been to every one of their conferences that are yearly, and also a member of the National Conference on Public Employees Retirement Systems, and been a member of that board, or of that training, over the last 10 years. The next thing I want to talk about is the administrative savings. One of the things that we have to look at very closely is we're talking about we're going to save money on these consultants, actuaries, third-party administrators, and things like that. Is there any data that where we've reached out to get some quotes so we can actually see it on paper in comparison to what we're paying now? That's what we really need to look at. You're still going to have 3 consultants, or maybe 1 consultant like Mr. Beard said, but they're still going to be paid 3 different fees for those funds. So you're still going to have to pay that cost there. Same way with the actuary, same way with legal, and same way with the third party. So we're going to still have to pay those. Well, I'd like to see in writing and the breakdown of what we're paying now and what are the quotes. And has the city gone out and talked to consultants around the country, and have we got those quotes and those numbers? That's really what we need to do. And that should have already been done or started to get some quotes so we could talk about that today in this workshop. If we talk about, well, I'm going to talk about Dallas real quick because I know some of those trustees out there. Really what got Dallas in trouble, and one of the big issues on Dallas, is that drop program that they have out in Dallas. And what they did on that drop program, they guaranteed an 8% return. And that was for many, many years. And that was even when the market went down back in 2007, 8, and 9, and you had a 20 to 38% decline in value of your funds, and they were still paying 8% returns. That was crazy. As a trustee on Atlanta Police Pension Board, I would have never agreed to anything like that. And but they did, and they pushed it through, and that was one of the big reasons why they got in trouble. And then at one time, all those guys in that drop program wanted to start pulling all that money out, and some of the guys had millions and millions of dollars in there from just one individual. So that was one of the big problems there. But let's look at returns. And I didn't want to get too technical on it, but Jim brought it up. So over the last year, the Police Pension Fund had a 13.86 point return rate. That was $101.5 million, a net return over the last calendar year. Right now, from in the last quarter, we're up $30 million net already, and continuing to push. But here's the big thing when you look at the investment strategy in Georgia. 25% of the money has to be in fixed income by state law. So basically, you have to make your returns on 75% of the money. So if you look at the police pension fund, it's worth $1,081 million. 25% of that money has to be, by Georgia law, in fixed income. So that's over $250 million has to be in fixed income. Fixed income rate, what's your return on that? Maybe 1.5%? So you really have to get after it on that 75%. Okay? So the Police Pension Board is a conservative board. We don't put our necks out there too far. We try to protect on the downside when that market goes back down too. So you got to do that and keep that in mind. So yeah, we can maybe make more than what we're making, but I'm telling you right now, you're going to put your neck out there, and when the market goes back down, then you stand a chance to lose more money. And our board talks about this all the time on downside protection too. So that's nothing new. I think we hired the best managers out there. We just hired a small cap manager named McQuarrie in the small cap space. And in that small cap space, you pay about 95 to 115 basis points on average. We negotiated that fee down to 61 basis points. You can't find that out there. Not for a top-notch small-cap company. And they were one of the best out there. We went on a nationwide search, and that's what the board selected, and I think it's going to be a great asset to that fund. But 61 basis points is very, very low for that space. We also, when we go to hire and we look at managers, for instance, Mesro is in the fixed income space. All three boards have Mesro. We get a discount rate because we have Mesro in all three spaces. So we already do that. We get the lowest rate that Mesro can give us. Let's talk a little bit about governance. That was mentioned. The attendance is always a tough thing for the city. Mr. Beard and Ms. Yancey are very, very busy people. They're in and out of meetings. They'll come in. They'll have stacks of books with them. They're, come in and vote and things like that. They do a great job. We have a great working relationship. And I don't know what the percentage of their workload is for our fund. It's probably maybe 1, 2, or 3% of what they have to do. They're spread so thin and have a lot of other responsibilities, and I understand that. And I've learned a lot from both of them on a lot of the questions when we interview managers and stuff. I listen to them. They're great questions. So they've helped me out tremendously, too. But let's look at the attendance. I pulled it over the last 8 years, and there's only 4 of us that's been on the board for the last 8 years. And it's Tony Biello. He's missed 5 meetings over the last 5 years. Chief Glazier's missed 7, and I've missed 3. But then when you look at the city council person that's on our board, it's Kalita Winslow. She's missed 69 meetings over the last 8 years. 69. And the 13th that she attended, she just came in and voted, and then she left. She wasn't even there the whole meeting for those 13 that she attended. Out of that 8-year period, we had 16 meetings that were canceled because of no quorum from the city. So when the city wants to talk about, they want to try to build trust in the employees, they got to show that they're going to come and willing to do that. And for Jim Beard and Miss Yancey's been great, and they do that. I know they're stretched thin, and I already talked about that, but maybe there needs to be somebody in there for their place to fill in sometimes too. I don't know how that would work. That would have to be discussed, and however the city would want to try to get that to work out. I don't know. If you were looking at this board on a 15-person board, that's almost too much to even consider how to get this to work and and to get everybody on the same page. But if you look at that, you're still going to have a high turnover rate on a 15-person board. It takes you 3 to 4 years to start learning this stuff, and that's if you're just overseeing one fund, let alone 3 funds. And it's going to be a need to be a full-time job. It's $3 billion in there, so you're going to be, there's a lot of money, a lot of responsibility. So you're going to need to take that serious, and you're going to need to attend conferences, meetings, and you're going to need to continually meet with these money managers and consultants and make sure they're doing the right job. One of the things that we do on our board, if you're not making the cut for managers, we don't let you just sit there. We get rid of you. There's nobody that's a money manager that's in our fund right now that was one when I came on 10 years ago. Sometimes the fund, we just outgrow them. They outgrow us. Their strategies change or whatever. But we just move on and try to find the next best one. And if you can't make it, then you're gone. I'm friends with a lot of them, but at the end of the day, my responsibility is to make as much money in this fund as I possibly can. And I've also made a lot of good decisions, had to make some hard decisions when a lot of the people from, when we were changing over from chief financial officers, well before Jim was there, and they weren't even in attendance. But I still made sound decisions that were good decisions, I think, that looked out for the city as well as the police board, because I know the vast majority of the money comes from the city on their contributions. And that's what a good trustee and an honest trustee will do. When you look at some of these pension systems across the country, they don't do that. And I listen to them, and I can't believe some of the things that they did. Is there any questions so far? I can tell you this, since January, Ken hit it on, since January of 1st of 2010, the fund was worth $614. It's worth $1,081 million now, a 467 net increase, which is good. It's never enough for me. I'm always looking to make more money. I think that's what good trustees do. If you look at where we rank across the country over the last 10 years, most of those years we rank in the top 10 percentile. And that's where we need to be, and that's what our goal should be, is trustees. But to get to these numbers and to get to those returns, you've got to be involved, you've got to come to meetings, you've got to meet with your managers and do what you're supposed to do. Because if not, it changes and things change. You've got to keep up with the economy, what's going on, what are the new trends coming. And right now, I think our six-person board works well together. We make good decisions. I think we're sound. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Strachan? Followed by Ms. Roberts.
Thank you, esteemed council members, law team, and other supporting staff. I also want to say thank you, some very cogent points by Ken Allen and also by Richard Light, especially just to highlight before I get into what I'd like to say. It's very, there's a scripture. It says, whoever is faithful and least is faithful and greatest, and whoever is unfaithful and least is unfaithful and greatest. So you bring that to a practical sense, a factory. If you have employees and you want them to assemble something that takes 200 steps to do it, and they can't assemble something that takes 2 steps, you're not going to be able to go and do the more complex. So I get those points, and thank you very much. I have 2 roles. I'm a trustee. I've been a trustee on the General Employees Pension Fund since 2010, and I've been the chair for the last 4 years. So I'm going to offer 2 perspectives very briefly. First perspective is as the chair. We sent some handouts out. If you haven't seen them yet, you have them now. All of that information is posted at www.atlantaga.gov/generalpension. First letter I'd like you to take a look at is dated October 25th, 2017. It's from our legal counsel, Morgan Lewis, and we sent that. We had them send it on our behalf to the city attorney, Mr. Berry, and we outlined significant legal concerns relative to the ability to unilaterally make the changes that are being considered in 1789. And so, of course, city has a different opinion. The city responded. We sent a second letter. That's posted. I'm sorry that you don't have it. But what I want to say, without getting into the details of this right now, is that without fully addressing these concerns, this could be very costly to the pension plans and to the city. If we move forward and it turns out we didn't have the legal right to do that, and you can hear the sentiments of many people here, it's not a very popular thing right now. It could be very expensive, and of course none of us want to do that. I think that all of us here today, we have different perspectives, but we're all united in the fact that we want to do what's best for the pension plans and for the sponsor.
Excuse me, Mr. Strachan, I have a quick question.
I'm not.
Where's the lawyer from?
Could I please finish what I have to say and save your questions to the end?
I'm just curious where the lawyer is from, Doug.
Thank you.
Where is he from?
How is that relevant?
Is he from Georgia?
No, he's not.
Where is he from?
They're from Chicago.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like, as a courtesy, please, to finish my thoughts, and I said I would be brief, and if you could save those to the end so we have this less combative, I would appreciate that. Okay. The second thing is you have a letter from GEF. It's been sent out to all council members. It was sent out yesterday. It highlights a number of things. Legal concerns that we just mentioned. We said, in general, as a board, we're okay with some kind of certification, some kind of training requirement. And I think generally we all agree, all the trustees, it takes 3 things to be a great trustee. You have to have integrity, you have to have passion, and you have to know something about what you're doing. And to ensure that in the future, the people that succeed us know what they're doing, I think at least from GEF, we're okay with education or certification requirement. We are willing to talk about consolidation, but again, we would like to see the savings. Have them actually identified. I can say this, if you'll go back to the savings sheet, please. that there's not going to be really any savings with third-party administration, not significant, fractions of a dollar. You won't see savings from actuaries. Right now, we have the general employees and APS plans combined for administrative and investment purposes, and actuarially, they're different plans, and you have to handle them actuarially differently, so you bear two expenses. You will save some money with investment consultants, and I won't say that that's insignificant. I don't think anybody is willing to stand up before the public and say anything we can save is insignificant, and I think you will save some money with legal fees. But again, as was brought up before, well articulated by Mr. Light, I think those have to be identified. What we cannot abide by in the letter that I sent from GEF, and I'm saying this as chair, is the governance changes. Governance changes, let's say we have the most honest administration now that we've had in the last 30 years, with the best of intent. Can we say and can we guarantee we're going to have that 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or in the future? So in the wisdom of the individuals, our forefathers who set these boards up, yeah, is it always the most efficient? It's not always the most efficient. Are they filled with professionals? They're not filled with professionals. They're filled with people that have skin in the game and have interest. And the premise here is that in a lifeboat, nobody drills a hole in their own boat. And so that's why we have these boards right now loaded with people who have skin in the game and who've made a career here and have put their money in here. Most of these people, I don't, even have Social Security. It's all in that pension. That's why it's loaded that way. So again, from the chair position, in the letter that you received as city council people, we have said, if the discussion continues, and if there's no legal impediments, and if this continues, then we want to see significant governance change. From my perspective, I've personally advocated long for reducing expense as much as possible in the administration of these plans. That's one of the chief responsibilities of a trustee. We have fiduciary duties of loyalty to act in the best interest of all the stakeholders, but primarily the participants. That's where the first loyalty lies. We have a fiduciary duty of care, where we're supposed to treat this like our own money, and we have a fiduciary duty of prudence, and part of that is the prudent investor rule, which allows us to delegate some of our authority to experts like investment consultants, investment managers, etc. Besides the use of passively managed index funds, I opined on the benefits of consolidation back in 2011. I differ. I'm speaking not as a chair, but as a trustee. Anywhere we can save money, and we already do it with the general employees and APS funds, I think that's a good idea. What I can't countenance, again, personally, is the governance changes that are in 17-0-1589. Loading all that responsibility to the administration, I think, is a misalignment with our best interests. So what I've suggested is that if you're going to have a 15-minute, and this is not something I want to make clear that other people support at this moment, but I just want to say my personal opinion is that if you took a 15-member board, which I don't think in corporate America is unworkable, right? And you had police, 2 active, 1 retired, fire, 2 active, 1 retired, general, 2 active, 1 retired, APS, 1 active, 1 retired, and then you had 4 other positions, 2 ex officio, one the mayor, 1 the CFO, and the mayor gets to appoint 1 council member who's interested and wants to show up, and somebody from APS. Now, you have a piece of legislation that is not from our board. It has my name on it. Police don't want to really talk about it this time. Fire don't. It's my perspective, but it outlines that. It's an alternative to the existing 17-0-1589. Thanks for your consideration. I hope you deliberate well. What's at stake, as was so eloquently mentioned before, is the future of these plans. We don't want to see a Detroit happen. We don't want to see think of any other bad example. You know, I think that we're on the right track, and we should deliberate very carefully before we enact this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Strachan. I know we'll digest your material. That takes us to Ms. Roberts, followed by Mr. Emerson.
Hello, council members, city law. Oh, a little bit closer. My name is Amber Roberts, and I am outside counsel for the General Employees Pension Fund. I work with Morgan Lewis. I'm an attorney there, an employee benefits and compensation attorney. I've worked on matters for the fund for almost 2 years now. No hiding the ball. I'm not from Georgia, but the board is still continuing to deliberate and discuss the proposed ordinance, and as such has not issued its non-binding recommendation at this time, but it has authorized Morgan Lewis to highlight a couple of observations and concerns that the board does have. And I'll keep it pretty brief since many of these points have already been made. But as an initial matter, I would like to reiterate the fact that the board would like you all to know that the trustees do generally support proposed ordinance language related to trustee training and education. Training and education requirements and benchmarks are certainly a positive requirement, and that's something that the board is doing actively and is prepared to continue to do, and believes that it could only serve to benefit incoming trustees so that they'll be better prepared to execute their fiduciary responsibilities. The second point is, as the board continues to evaluate the proposal, it would like to reiterate its request for credible data on this issue. At the October meeting of the General Employees Pension Fund, members of the board requested that data be provided prior to this working session, and were assured by members of the administration that they would have that data, and we haven't seen it. And the board believes that that's important and it's necessary to evaluate that information. And again, to reiterate what's already been said, believes that data should include, among other things, a study of the difference between investment manager fees with proposed consolidation as compared to the sum of investment management fees as they currently sit. And the board eagerly awaits the results of that study so that it can continue its evaluation and deliberation in the most informed manner possible. And finally, while the board, again, has not issued a formal recommendation, the members are very clear on the fact that the governance change is problematic from the board's perspective. The proposed ordinance would give the mayor of the city the power to appoint a majority of trustees of a consolidated board to oversee more than $3 billion in retiree assets. And before I proceed, it is not the board's position to, that it doesn't make any statement that seeks to impugn the credibility of any current members of the administration or the motives behind this proposed ordinance. It goes back to some of the discussion that has already been presented today. We're not saying that things aren't going well. It's good that things are going well right now. We're concerned about what happens if there are people in charge who may have interests and intents that are counter to those who are currently in place. And so the first issue that falls under the governance problem is that the proposed ordinance places an excessive amount of power and influence under one individual's control. And there are numerous examples in other municipalities. People have alluded to Detroit, people have alluded to Chicago, indicating that an unmitigated amount of power and influence over pension assets can really leave the door open for abuses of that power. And what we have in place right now are checks and balances, and we'd like to keep those checks and balances in place. And the second issue that we haven't really discussed at length today is that the proposed ordinance governance changes really strip away the rights of pension beneficiaries to vote for and elect a majority of board trustees, and that is particularly significant to the General Employees Pension Fund. The board is strongly against the idea that we should disenfranchise our beneficiaries and participants. They currently have the right to choose a majority of the representatives that oversee their retirement money. And what's not being said is that if we look at the proportion of representation in the proposed ordinance, there's something that's being taken away there, and we haven't really discussed the rationale behind that. Savings, understand that's all good. Oversight, better visibility into what's going on, those things are very important, but what is at the core of stripping away the rights of participants and beneficiaries to elect a majority of the trustees that oversee the retirement funds? That is an open question that has not been discussed at length today.
If I may interject a second, you know, when I first read this paper, that flaw stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, it's very clear that one person was going to have the authority to control the votes on the board. And so that is why the amendment has proposed more action by council and fewer appointments by whoever our next mayors are in the future. And we also pared the membership from 15 to 11 because I agree 15 is too many. 11 is probably too many too. But so I just want you to understand that the structure, the appointment structure in the first thing that's before you, I've suggested that it get changed, as I read in the beginning of the meeting, as an amendment on Wednesday.
Thank you for highlighting that. And again, within the four corners of what the board has authorized us to discuss today, I think the board would reiterate the proportion question that is still open,
right.
Even.
I got it. I'll write that down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And finally, we would just like to highlight that we have sent a few pieces of correspondence to the City Law Department, and members of council this morning received this hard copy packet of correspondence via FedEx. It was delivered to your offices and also transmitted via email on the 7th, just highlighting some of the correspondence describing the board's considerations and concerns and our preliminary legal analysis. As part of its consideration, the board did ask us as outside counsel to conduct preliminary legal analysis related to certain components of the proposed ordinance. And we did provide that to the City Law Department. We did not receive as robust of a response as we would have hoped for. And in our most recent correspondence, we did reiterate that request for information. We understand, based on the city's reply and the information that was shared today, we have a sense of what the city's law department's position is, but we would really welcome a response that is a little bit more specific. I mean, the letter that we submitted was about 8 pages long and had 300 pages of legal enclosures and research, and we received less than a paragraph reply. And as you've heard today, there are a number of people and entities who do have a vested interest here, and we would just like to highlight that these are open questions that reasonable lawyers, regardless of what state they may reside in, would discuss in considering this proposal. So,
and you're talking about the October 25 letter?
Exactly.
Okay.
Council members, I just want to, from the perspective of the law department, say that our response was to look at the Supreme Court's case. And I want to reiterate, I was one of the drafters of the 2011 pension reform. I argued the challenge before the Fulton County Superior Court, where we got a 26-page decision upholding the plan. The Supreme Court of Georgia ruled unanimously and set out paragraph by paragraph a direct response to what the Morgan Lewis firm has written. I could not possibly say it better than the Supreme Court of Georgia, nor would I want to attempt to. I fully respect that decision, and it was unanimous, as I mentioned. Pension dollars have already been spent to challenge the city's right to change its pension plan, and rather than spending more time to repeat what the Supreme Court of Georgia has already ruled on, The law department's position is and will remain that anyone who is questioning the legal authority for the city to amend its pension plan should look at what the unanimous Supreme Court of Georgia has ruled. It's in there in detail, and I don't want to repeat what they've said or try to say it any better or any differently. I could not.
Thank you.
I'd just like to comment that we did review the decision of the Supreme Court, and we did ask detailed questions related to what the City Law Department's position is. We can't put words in the city's mouth if we aren't given any sort of reply to those detailed questions.
So again, is that in the October 25 letter?
Yes, that is in the October 25th letter, and then there was a follow-up where we sought to clarify the response that we received to highlight what we believe are credible, open issues related to the issues being raised in this proposed ordinance, which, as far as I know, was not discussed in Borders.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emerson, followed by Mr. Hollander.
Thank you for allowing me to speak here at the work session. Try to keep this as brief as possible. But I'm the attorney, legal counsel for the City of Atlanta Firefighters Pension Plan. I've been legal counsel to them for 3 years, or actually 4 years. I've been practicing in Georgia for 13 years. I've totally practiced law for 18 years. I've worked with Georgia public pension plans, and I work with 25 of them for 13 years now. So I'm experienced in the Georgia pension law arena. I just wanted to state on the record that I do think that the legal department's analysis of just relying on the Borders case is questionable and short-sighted. The Borders case, if you get into it, is the right for the city to amend its pension plan, change the benefits for its employees. And I believe, in my interpretation, is the Supreme Court held that they could, provided that they reserved the right to amend the plan, which they did in various plan documents. And that is what Borders held. And it wasn't any new law. I mean, that had been held in prior Supreme Court decisions, namely the Withers case, if you want to take a look at that one. Withers v. Register, I believe. I do want to also emphasize that I do not believe that the formalities in the city charter have been followed for issuing such an ordinance. A couple of things come to mind, or one, the actuary investigative report concerning the ordinance. We have not seen anything at the firefighter pension plan level. Also, a request for a recommendation from the pension plan, the firefighters pension plan, a non-binding recommendation from us. We have received no request for a non-binding recommendation. And there is a 45-day window in which to request that recommendation. It was not requested. The boards all work that I'm aware of with all very competent professional investment advisors now. It's not like changing the board's going to change expertise to a dramatically different level. These folks are experienced investment advisors. I've worked with several of them on other pension plans in Georgia. They're highly reputable. They know the Georgia law, which is very specific governing pension plan investments. And for what it's worth, I think they all work together as best they can to get the best deals for the City of Atlanta in compiling all assets in order to get the best basis point fees on any investments. I've even heard, I have not seen, that there are studies that have been done at least by one investment group in Atlanta, Callan, that says that combining all plans into one investment committee and having one investment advisor and having the same managers does not create any significant investment savings. Just to echo the concerns, I guess, of the Super Board having the majority the way it lies with city officials and appointees of the city, I can firsthand tell you that there is time commitment issues on the part of city officials for the pension board meetings that we have for the firefighters. They are very short and to the point. They may have 15 minutes to get all we have to discuss and vote on done so that they can leave to go to their next meeting. So I'm not sure how this super board as laid out is going to redress any of those concerns. And then also our city council person, I think, has been to 2 meetings since I've been there for 4 years that I can recall. Ms. Bottoms, Commissioner Bottoms. I'm sorry, City Council Bottoms. The certification, I am a faculty member of the Georgia Association of Pension Plan Trustees. It's an association that's been around for 8 years in the state of Georgia. All we do is educate pension plan trustees. And we have a school now that has been going on for 5 years. And I'm proud to say that the three of the trustees that I represent for the city of Atlanta are all certified pension plan trustees under the GAPPT. They've passed 2 tests, and they continue to get their continuing education each year at the school and at the conference. So there is a precedent there already set with the firefighters, plus any additional training that they go to on their own outside of the program I'm involved with. I know that they attend as well. We also have a new member who's planning to attend in the school in March. I will say that the 15-member board makeup is quite large. The other pension plans that I work with, I think the largest board is 9 members. Just to put that in reference for you guys. Again, I would like to echo the comments that I think we need a more thorough legal analysis to make sure that we're on the right page here if this moves forward. I do think, and I would like to echo, that the representation should be closely scrutinized and should more mimic the current setup of the boards if anything go forward with an ordinance. The current boards, they could be better, and maybe it's better suited to try to address some of the transparency concerns, some of the education concerns of maybe some of the boards directly with the current boards, because if it's not broke, I just don't see a reason to try to fix it. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hollander, followed by Mr. McNeil.
Good morning. My name is Brent Hollander. I'm the Vice Chair of the Firefighters Pension. We talk about the elected members and the training. It is kind of, I think, a little ironic that, as Mr. Emerson spoke, that all of the elected trustees are the ones that are actually certified public pension trustees. We are tested. When we talk about the investments, we have hired investment consultants. They are the experts in this field, not the people on the board. They are to advise us. That is their only job. These boards don't operate with a chief investment officer that is making individual decisions. The boards are advised by the investment consultants. Talking a little bit about the return of the plans. Over the last 10 years, our plan for fire is in the 3rd percentile among our peers, meaning that the plan has performed better than 97% of all similar plans out there. I think that's pretty good. And when you take into account, like Mr. Lott talked about, that 25% of our fund has to be put into fixed income, we're only making money on 75% of it over the last 5 to 8 years because fixed income is paying next to nothing. Looking at why this has come up in what I would call the 11th hour. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are only 2 council meetings left. And if this doesn't pass before then, it's dead, and we start a new legislative cycle with a new mayor, new council president, and several new council members. And it does bring into question a board that is appointed. Basically, I'm not exactly sure what the makeup of what you propose in the amendment, but it still looks like a majority or even a supermajority of the board is appointed by the mayor or the council. No one that has a vested interest in it. And while it may seem like a good idea now, we don't know what the future is going to hold. Who's going to be in City Hall? Are they going to make the best decisions? Now we have elected members that are 50% of the trustees and city appointees that are 50% of the trustees. It's a good balance. It's checks and balances. Which brings me to another point. I've been on the Firefighters Pension Board for 4 years. Worked very well with Mr. Beard, Ms. Yancey. As Mr. Emerson spoke, our city council person has been absentee over 75% of the time. But at no point has there been an investment that we brought forth that the city-appointed experts have disagreed with. All of the investments that we've made, including our investment consultant, has been a unanimous decision between all members, the trustees. So I'm not sure what great change in governance, what effect this is going to have. Both Callan and Marquette have said that there's little to no savings in the investment fees or the management fees by them, as well as when you look at our investments, as Mr. Light said, we're already getting discounts when we share the same investments with fire and police, or if we share fire, police, and general employees. One example is that we moved all of our large cap investments to passive. We negotiated it down to 1.5 basis points. Nobody out there is going to get a better deal than that. Lastly, Southern States lawsuit in the early 2000s allowed us to establish third-party administrator as well as hire outside counsel for the board. Basically, this legislation would allow the new board to undo that. This would allow the city to reestablish the administration of the fund, which is what that whole suit was about, the problems that we were experiencing with mismanagement, overcharging, and I think, yeah, fraud. So with that, are there any questions?
Apparently not. I, at this point, want to say to BZA board members and staff have not arrived yet, and so I'm going to recommend that we continue until they're ready. So we're not delaying their meeting. They have not shown up yet. All right, thank you. So, Mr. McNeil, followed by Lieutenant Gertis.
Thank you, Council, for allowing us to speak today and meet on this important issue. My name is John McNeil, and I am the newly elected retiree representative on the Firefighters Pension Board. I was elected in July. I've already spent a great deal of time in training because I feel it's very important to understand what the experts are saying when we're in the room talking about that there are consultants and we have to know, what's happening and what they're explaining to us. So I think that's very important, and all of us have taken that very seriously and have been members of national and state organizations that train you in being a good, intelligent trustee. So I think everything that's been said today has been very clear that we have a system that's really not broke. It may need some tweaking, but it seems to be working very well. Bigger is not necessarily better. When you go with a mega board, you lose that focus that you have with the three individual boards where they're focusing on investments and how it's being governed, as opposed to a mega board that has to be looking at all of them. And so I think the diversity that was mentioned earlier too, where you have three boards and they're investing in some different ways, gives you more security in this $1 billion that we're talking about, as opposed to it all going in one direction. So the other thing is that as far as the legal side of it, I'm not an attorney, and I don't pretend to be an attorney, but if you look at the slide that was listed that showed the Borders case, if you could put that up, it indicates that the city has the authority to finance and establish the pension boards. It doesn't say they govern the pension boards. And in fact, in 2004, when the city and the firefighters and police officers went to court to determine about getting independent administration and getting independent legal consulting, that the judge ruled in that case that the city did have that authority to establish and finance, but it doesn't have the authority by city charter in any way. The city charter lists 60 functions of the city, but it does not list that it's to govern or be control of the pension funds. So I would question that, just from my perspective, as to whether that part of it is even legal. So I think that's all. I just wanted to speak briefly to you.
Thank you. Lieutenant?
Can I just...
Yeah, briefly, please.
Sure. Yeah, two things. And I actually... I disagree with the holding of that other case. I think Borders certainly controls the more recent case. But I wanted to go back a second and talk about whether or not the mayor and the council have an interest in this. And I think it's important to say, absolutely, we have an interest. And this goes back to the lifetime benefits of people who are in the defined benefit plan. Because to the extent that these funds, the pension funds, are not doing as well as they could, it is the general fund that has to pick it up. That is the taxpayers who have to address that. It's all employees. I mean, there were a time long ago when all employees in the general fund were furloughed. So this is something that the mayor and the council do have an interest in and should have an interest in, because it affects the taxpayers.
All right, thank you. Now, the BZA board members and supporting staff members are here. This is a previously noticed public hearing, and so we're going to have to step out of the way. I want to thank everyone for coming. A lot of great points were raised here that I deeply appreciate. We're not done discussing this, obviously. We still had 3 speakers who are left to sign up, so we're going to have to continue this conversation. There have been a lot of notes taken regarding questions. The good news is we're all in agreement that what we all want is the strongest possible plan, so it seems to me that that's kind of puts us 95% together, which as a starting point. So we're going to continue this discussion. For those who didn't get a chance to speak today, or for those of you who have follow-up or additional questions, you don't have to wait. You can please email all of us your questions and comments. Ms. Adrian.
For the finance meeting on Wednesday, I'd request that the CFO come forward with some of the data points that were asked for from the public here, please.
We're going to step out of the way now for the BZA. Thank you.